After years of bloody conflict, is Chechnya finally stable under the iron hand of the Kadyrov clan? From being sworn enemies of Russia since the 1990s, Chechens have fought alongside Russians in Ukraine. Why? Have the Chechens been subdued, or have they just been rented? Join me, Darasz, for How We Got Here.
Located in the mountains of the North Caucasus, between the Caspian and Black Seas, lies Chechnya. Inhabited by indigenous Chechens and linguistically distinct, the region was historically organized around clans rather than centralized states. Customary laws and later Islam dictated social norms. A stateless, decentralized society, Chechnya never evolved as a kingdom or empire, which rendered it difficult to conquer and govern. From the 16th to the 18th centuries, Russia made several attempts to subjugate the region, through both settlement and military action. However, it was only in the early 19th century that General Alexei Yermolov's strategy of terror started bringing results. In detail, Yermolov's efforts included burning villages, destroying crops, executing hostages, broad deforestation, and forcing tribes into exposed plains. Chechens and other regional ethnic groups found unity in Islam and the charismatic Imam Shamil. Having unified Chechens, Dagestanis and others, Shamil led the Caucasian imamate from 1834 to 1859. In response, Russia began deporting villages en masse, resettling populations loyal to the Tsar, and doubled down on terror. By 1859, Shamil surrendered. The fall of Tsarist Russia and the rise of the Soviet Union only brought more suffering to the humiliated and subjugated Chechens. In February 1944, on the order of Soviet Security Police Chief Lavrenti Beria, with the blessings of Stalin, 496,000 Chechens and Ingush were deported to Central Asia. With at least a quarter of the population dead from the cold, starvation and disease, the event also came to be known as the Ardak Genocide. The hollowed-out villages were repopulated by Russian settlers, which contributed to the wiping out of Chechen cultural and ethnic memory. Only after Stalin's death in 1953 were the Chechens allowed to return. Once the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, a window of opportunity opened for the Chechens. The same year, on November 1st, Chechnya declared independence. 3 years later, Russia launched an invasion to quell the rebellion. Although the capital Grozny was flattened and civilians killed in the tens of thousands, Russia failed to pacify the former Soviet Republic. Moscow signed a peace agreement with Chechen separatists, effectively granting de facto independence to Ichkeria. However, Moscow did not genuinely accept Chechenya's sovereignty and used the interwar period to lull the republic's vigilance and weaken it politically. In 1999, the empire struck back with a full-scale invasion under the pretext of fighting terrorism, completely disregarding the prior agreement. The war brought brutal suppression and the installation of a pro-Kremlin regime.
I'm delighted to welcome our guest today, Krzysztof Jaworski. He's the Director of International Affairs at the Institute for Security and International Development. Welcome once more to our programme.
Thank you for having me.
Let's go right back to the 19th century and this the conflict between the Imamate and the Russian Empire. What characterised the origins of this clash of these two organizations?
So the first thing is that the Russian Empire in the second half of 18th century expanded toward Caucasus because of its rivalry with the Ottoman Empire and also with the Persian Empire. So it's about the geopolitical drivers of this situation. These territories were useful for Russia because of the access to Black Sea and also the access to warm water ports and trade routes, which were very important for this aspiring and expanding power. And at the same time, it was the possible territory for the settlers and for the expansion and also resources. So when it comes to Imamat, it was formed of nations and of people who were living there for centuries, and after the conquest of by Russians, they, under the Imam Shamil, formed the federation, then confederation, and tried to fight against these conquerors.
Are the parallels? We were talking about this before we came on. Are the parallels between the American expansion westwards and the Russian expansion southeast? Into the Caucasus. Are they accurate? They're more or less were late 19th century phenomenon, sophisticated empires civilizing empty lands. Is this an accurate way of describing it, or is this the way the Russians see it?
So before answering your question, I have one general observation, because I think that generally when we analyze history, it is very useful to make analogies and to compare several different countries and so on. However, in context of discussing the Russian history, we also have to have in mind that Russian official narratives, Russian propaganda uses these historical facts and also use them, in my opinion, effectively. They are wise in their propaganda because they use the facts that are true, but they then make different meaning out of them.
In what way? Can you?
Yes, I have one specific thing. When we discuss the imperialism and the 19th century and the impact of these processes nowadays, Russians made themselves look as a non-imperial power in global south, while they are the empire, of course, and they are also colonial empire, which sometimes is forgotten. Of course, we understand that historically for people in, for example, Africa, in many Asian countries, the Russians weren't problem. Yes. They weren't the ones who conquered them. But at the same time, to answer your questions about parallels when it comes to territorial expansion of United States in 19th century and of Russian expansion in Caucasus, we can of course point at several similarities. For example, the fact that both of these expansive powers were dealing with different, diversified, complex, non-unified people living in these territories. So they used the strategy of divide and conquer, they used the violence, they used force, but of course at the same time there are several important differences. For example, as I mentioned already, for Russia it was driven also by geopolitical rivalry with another empire, with Ottoman Empire. In the United States, of course, there were also rivalry with Spain, with United Kingdom, but at the same time it was the will of many people, of settlers, of yes. people who were willing to make money out of settling these new territories. So generally I think it's good to discuss such things, but I don't have like any definite conclusions.
Yeah. That's fair enough. One of the things that struck me while we were looking at the clip was the rather romantic image of the struggle. Does this idea of Russian expansion into the Caucasus have the same Orientalism as, say, the Americans have to their Wild West, in terms of the cultural responses, the painters, artists, literature? Does it have that parallel?
Yes, there are also...
There's Tolstoy and his Cossacks, isn't there?
Yes, there are also these factors. Another important thing is that most of the people living in northern Caucasus were Islamic. So it was also the factor which was potentially dangerous for the stability and for the loyalty of these people towards Russian Empire. So they already in 19th century started the attempts to re-engineer the demographics of the region, the settlement of Orthodox people, the settlement of Cossacks, as you mentioned. So that's the parts, and then the the fight by these people under Shamil made the Moscow again to push further and to look at this not only as some subjects of empire, but also people who need to be civilized, who need to be also freed from the oppressive rulers, because it was also part of this narrative that this conquer is for the good of these people finally.
Yes. Is there such a thing as Chechen historiography? How does that see this period, if at all?
Yes, this is also a very interesting question regarding the fact that there is no such free speech or freedom of maintaining historical research in Chechnya, and most of it is under the strict rule, and it should strengthen the rule of Kadyrov right now. So we discussed the Imam Shamil. He was seen in a different way in the 19th when there were aspirations for independence in Chechnya, and for some period even the independent Chechenian state. But right now, in recent years, as Ramzan Kadyrov is trying to show his loyalty toward Putin himself and also toward Russia, he criticized Shamil. He reminded that Shamil wasn't Chechen, he was Avar. As we mentioned already, there are many nationalities in Northern Caucasus, which is ongoing and will be an important factor when we look at this region. And he commented that Shamil, by his insurgents against Russia, brought the disaster for Chechen people, because he followed them and then they were killed, they were suppressed. And so what I think is important, that these historical narratives can be used elastically by the rulers, and they will. So even if now this narration is dominant, it is possible, because it will be plausible narration to make the exact opposite of this narration.
Opposite case. We'll have a look at Kadyrov and his legacy in our second clip.
In 1994, when Russia attempted to quash the Chechen rebellion, Ahmed Kadyrov led the fight for Chechenya's independence. Commanding a militia that later came to be known as the Kadyrovtsi, he contributed to the republic's short-lived freedom. In recognition of his service, he was soon appointed Chief Mufti of the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria in 1995. But in 1999, Kadyrov and his men switched sides. After the Second War, Russian President Vladimir Putin made Ahmad the interim head of state. In 2003, Ahmad Kadyrov was elected the first president of Chechnya. In less than a year, Chechen insurgents assassinated him. Alu Alkanov, a Russian army veteran, was elected as president, but after he was dismissed by Putin in 2007, Chechenya's top office was given to Ahmad's son, Ramzan. The Kremlin lavished Ramzan with billions of dollars, which he used to rebuild the capital, Grozny, transforming it into a modern city and upgrading his Kadyrovtsi to a heavily armed private militia. Kadyrov maintained order through a reign of terror and granted his law enforcement officers the exclusive right to exact vendettas, a Chechen tradition. Kadyrov used martial arts to keep his troops fit and battle-ready. Around 2015, Kadyrov started Chechenya's first MMA gym and named it Fight Club Ahmed, in memory of his father. With thousands of Chechen boys joining the gym to learn how to throw kicks and punches, the business served as a breeding ground for warriors. The best of the best would fight in the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Others would fill Kadyrov's ranks, fighting alongside the Russian military in Syria and Ukraine. The Kadyrovtsi joined the initial assault on Ukraine's capital Kyiv, fought in the bloody siege of Mariupol, and have been accused of involvement in the Bucha massacre. They were also reportedly dispatched to take out Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Recently, there have been claims that the Kadyrovtsi are in charge of disciplining, torturing, and even executing unmotivated and retreating Russian troops. But with the recent news of Ramzan's health deteriorating exponentially due to acute renal necrosis, who are they going to pledge allegiance to when he's gone? Ramzan has 3 sons. His eldest son, 20-year-old Ahmad, who was recently appointed acting deputy prime minister in Chechnya, is allegedly the smartest, the humblest and the most humane. His second son, 19-year-old Zelimhan, having the reputation of a brute, was expelled from the family this year and exiled to the United Arab Emirates. The youngest son, Adam, is widely regarded as Ramzan's future successor. Still, according to Chechen law, Adam cannot become the head of Chechnya until 2037, when he turns 30. It is likely that before then, power will be handed over to a representative of the country's strongest clan, the Benoi. Other possibilities include Adam Delikmanov, member of the state Russian Duma for Chechnya, and Chechenya's Prime Minister Magomed Daudov.
Bringing the history of Chechnya up to date from the 1990s, when it, I suppose, entered the consciousness of the Western Europe, at least. Can you just outline the journey that Chechnya made from being an insurgency, as you mentioned, into being a very loyal, seemingly loyal client state of Vladimir Putin?
So generally, I think that the main factor when we look at this is the power. People follow those who have power because they can stay alive, not to be killed, because it's very violent the way they are dealing with other factions, their rivals. And the one who had power back then was Vladimir Putin, who started to win the second war in Chechnya, and some parts of Chechnya nation under the Ahmed Kadyrov and others who followed him, they decided that now it's better to be loyal towards Moscow, towards new Tsar, let's call him this way.
Because we can't win.
Yes, because we can't win, but we can maybe live better under his rule. At least our family members and our friends can live better, or members of our clan, because it's also important to have in mind that this broader family, the clan, is an important structure in Northern Caucasus. You are loyal in the first place toward your kin, and then comes other loyalties, like, for example, towards state or towards, like right now, Russian Federation.
Yes.
So Ahmed Kadyrov was successful because he had more resources, more power. He was supported by the Moscow. It was a very long process. Officially, the war ended in 2009, and the fights with several groups of insurgents, which from the beginning aim of independence, then moved toward more Islamic aims, and they were cooperating with other Islamic groups in other regions. So these fights, although lowering its intensity, they were still the important factor in the region in 20s.
So in this sense, Ramzan Kadyrov, at least, is a very useful power, local warlord, the top bully of his area, and he's very successful against the Islamic State and the other Islamist groups.
Yes, definitely. He was really effective in suppressing these other Islamic groups, not only in Chechnya, but also in Dagestan, in Ingushetia, in broad Northern Caucasus. That's one of the sources of his position inside Russian Federation. Of course, in the first place, he is loyal to Putin, and he is taking care of showing it, that he is a loyal servant, he is a loyal soldier of the Vladimir Putin. But at the same time, he is trying to make his position better, to grab more power inside the region. He has ambitions on the central stage. He is not bowing between other people than Putin. For example, several conflicts with commanders of security agencies, Russian security agencies during these years were also the factor, and he tried to impose his position.
And you mentioned also that he carved out an expansion of Chechenya's borders of Ingushetia and Dagestan. So he's kind of expanding his kind of mini kingdom, I suppose.
Yes, it was an unprecedented move inside the Russian Federation. It was silently accepted by the Moscow. It started the protests in Ingushetia. However, finally the Ingushetian highest court accepted this new treaty. So I think that while, of course, Ramzan Kadyrov and Chechnya are part of the Russian Federation, they also consider themselves like the rulers of their own small kingdom. And of course, historically, it used to be because they are not a large nation, that they had to be vassals of someone, they had to bow before someone.
To learn the art of compromise, I suppose.
Yes.
So where does that leave the dynasty now? He's been reported as very sick, got these 3 sons. If we follow the analogy of the feudal analogy that we've been talking about, where are the potential rivals? Or are they just hiding because they're scared of being killed by Kadyrov's men?
When it comes to personal ambitions, let's put it aside for a moment, but I think that it's very important to remember about several other factors. So if we look at this aim of many Islamic people in Northern Caucasus, including Chechens, to be able to live the way that, for example, Sharia law demands them to, now it's possible for them in Chechnya. It's even required because inside its quasi-independence of Chechnya, Ramzan Kadyrov imposed some parts of Islamic law, some parts of other local traditions. He also promotes using the Chechen language in official meetings also. So many of these aims that independent movement wanted to achieve, they are achieved under this rule. Of course, it's in exchange for loyalty. And when it comes, for example, to economics, right now Chechnya developed because of the transfers of financing from the federal budget. Of course, it was also for exchange for this loyalty and being effective tool of stabilization of the region, being effective tool of suppressing of Islamic groups. So many of these factors which could make broader mass of people want some change, they are no longer in existence. However, at the same time, this process of being independent to some degree, being able to impose power, for example, on neighbors. These neighbors were there for many centuries, so they were also enemies for many centuries, much older than Russians. So it also makes Chechen people prouder, feeling the force that they are able to achieve something, and it also could create some dangerous dynamics for Russia in the future, because of course right now the rule of Moscow is uncontested, because as we started, it's the power is here. Putin still have power, but when Putin is gone in the future, or some other problems in Russia starts to be visible, that's the open question what will happen.
A final question to you. Should the West care about Chechnya? Okay, we've seen the horrors of the 1990s and the 2 wars and the subsequent fighting there, but are there any geostrategic interests that the West has in Chechnya, or is it a North Caucasus country that can take care of itself, that has to be fighting with its neighbors?
Yes, so in my opinion, it's good to hedge for different possibilities in the future. And in the West, there are active members of Chechen diaspora, and they are still organized in the political way. Of course, right now they have no significant influence, but while the cost of maintaining relations with them and supporting them is not so high, in my opinion, it's worth to keep it that way, because you never know what the future will bring.
Yes.
Another thing is that sometimes when we discuss the future of Russia, and we hope, because we hope that Russia will disintegrate maybe, or at least get into some internal chaos, we like to think that Chechnya may be this part. Of course, maybe, but again, I will not bet that it's the dominant possibility for the future. While it is wise to hedge and use some of our resources, it is also unwise to bet everything on this one possibility.
Yes, of course. Krzysztof Jaworski, thank you very, very much for coming onto our program. Fascinating discussion.
Thank you very much.
That's it. Join us next time. That's Tuesdays, you know the time, 21:35, 35 minutes past 9 CET. Join us then.